everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. Today we're talking about self-sabotage. So where does this part come from? Why does it do what it does, right? Maybe we've actually achieved some sort of happiness or success, and then lo and behold, our self-sabotaging part acts up and ruins the day. So if you're familiar with my channel already, you know I love IFS, internal family systems therapy. It's fabulous for survivors of childhood trauma that have layers of abuse and neglect and really bad things happening. And what happens is we get a lot of these wounded parts, and sometimes they take over and without our permission, and they attempt to try to keep us safe. But sometimes the way they try to keep us safe really actually hurts us. So we're going to talk about this particular part, self-sabotage, why it does what it does, where it comes from. We're going to define it, give you an idea of what it looks like, and we're also going to talk about how to heal this part. If you like the idea of IFS and parts, check my channel out. Feel free to subscribe. I have playlists for IFS. Lots of other parts have been described on my channel. So feel free to check those out if this is intriguing to you. This is a wonderful approach. It's evidence-based approach for dealing with trauma. And as a therapist, it's my favorite approach for working with childhood trauma and all the different parts we get from all the negative experiences we've had. So go ahead and sit down, make yourself comfortable. I hope you enjoy this. Feel free to leave a comment below. Any ideas you have for future videos, I'm always interested in hearing them. And I hope you really enjoy this. So let's get started. All right, so let's go ahead and start first with giving you an idea of what self-sabotage is. You might already have some idea, right? But I like to go a little more in depth because sometimes there's kind of layers to how these parts work, and maybe they don't all look the same. So there might be different scenarios that self-sabotage can really act up that are not exactly the same as maybe another scenario where self-sabotage acts up. All right, so in a nutshell, self-sabotaging is the part that essentially undermines our own happiness or goals. Once we've achieved some sort of success or we're at a place in our life where we're actually feeling pretty happy, boom, somehow we undermine ourselves. Like, why do we do that, right? So we're going to get to that in a minute. Self-sabotage can be intentional or done through a lack of action. So things like dragging our feet, forgetting to do something important, procrastination, putting things off, or purposely putting ourselves in like a really bad situation where we know this is going to be bad for us and we do it anyways. Like, why the heck do we do this to ourselves, right? We're going to get to that. All right, so I have an example here on this slide. The first one is like purposely undermining relationships that are good for you. Maybe you finally found the person who is just a wonderful fit in every way. They're healthy, they treat you well, they're loving, and all of a sudden you notice yourself starting to pull away. Maybe you're pushing your partner away with anger. Maybe you're avoiding them more and more, and they're like, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? You're shutting down, for example, you're emotionally withdrawing, and you're doing this. But yet you can't figure out, why am I doing this? I'm literally so happy. I don't want to actually do this. It's your self-sabotaging part. All right, so essentially your self-sabotaging part is secretly afraid of happiness, right? If you're a childhood trauma survivor, you've had so many bad things happen to you that you have parts that don't trust that happiness is actually a real thing or that it can actually be sustained. So rather than allowing you to get happy and be happy, they kind of self-sabotage. For some weird reason, these parts feel like, well, at least I have some control over here by ruining this good thing, versus trusting maybe that the other person will actually truly be there for us. So that's really scary, right? That's a loss of control, trying to trust other people to actually be there for us. So self-sabotaging parts are very, very commonly about control, controlling hope, controlling happiness, and just making sure that in some ironic way, we maintain control by ruining our own happiness. So we'll go a little bit more into detail from an IFS lens here in just a minute. All right. So the second example here is maybe we delay going to the doctor. Maybe we're having some nagging symptoms. They seem kind of serious, but we're like, yeah, it's fine, And so we secretly believe I'm not really worthy of being taken care of, right? If we have a lots of history of childhood abuse and neglect, maybe our parents routinely neglected us medically or emotionally in other ways, we can have parts that truly believe we're not worth taking care of. And so sometimes that self-sabotaging part comes into play, for example, with this physical health example of just not taking care of ourselves. And then boom, come to find out it was a serious health condition and something terrible happens. So yeah, self-sabotaging is a really difficult part. I see it very commonly in childhood trauma survivors. So you're not alone if you have this part. Lots of us have parts like this. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide where we start to talk about the jobs and roles that this part has. And then finally, we'll talk about the antidote, so what this part needs to heal. All right, let's get started on the next slide. All right, so IFS teaches that every part has a job or role in the system, right? There's self or authentic wise self, and then there's parts. And parts developed to help keep us safe from being wounded and hurt. So if we're a childhood trauma survivor, we get what we call exile. So those are really painful things like unworthiness and shame and feeling unlovable, right? We get that from our abusive childhood. And then what happens is you develop parts to help protect the exiles from being activated. So maybe, for example, the self-sabotaging part, the exile is related to, it could be related to unworthiness, really feeling a deep wound of unworthiness, or deeply feeling like life is not trustworthy and we don't deserve happiness. And then in order to control the pain that that part causes, self-sabotaging takes on this job or role of being kind of micromanager, controller in the background of like, I'll mitigate any possible signs of danger ahead and we'll keep you safe. All right. So one way I see that self-sabotage really helps to control circumstances for us is through preventing hope. Ooh, this one is so painful for a lot of trauma survivors because a lot of what has happened to us has really caused us to feel hopeless, that life can ever be any better and that we'll be okay or that we'll ever be loved. So not having hope is a very devastating emotion, as you can imagine, especially if you've experienced this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So self-sabotage can come on board along with other parts. Self-sabotage is not the only part. As I mentioned, there's additional parts here that can play a role in mitigating emotional pain. But yeah, what self-sabotage does is, I know, it's like, ooh, I know what I'll do here. I will purposely make this scenario, maybe this relationship or this job or whatever it is, I'll purposely make it go wrong. And that way, my wonderful person that I reside within doesn't have to actually have hope that things are going to be okay and then to have it be lost again. So this part is terrified of bad things happening and of us losing hope, like gaining hope and then losing it again. That is too scary. That is too scary. If we've had this happen too many times before through being traumatized, we have parts that are not willing to ever have hope again. Nope. We're just going to control the amount of hope in the system by just having absolutely no expectations or self-sabotaging or, being depressed and not feeling anything. So yeah, we can get parts that do different things. So self-sabotage very much prevents hope. And it's kind of a control freak, it loves to maintain control. At least if we're ruining things for ourselves, well, that's kind of comforting because we're still in control. Kind of ironic, isn't it? All right. And then IFS also teaches that every part has a greatest fear. All right. The greatest fear keeps it doing what it does and for the length of time that it does. All right, so self-sabotage's greatest fear is that you actually might find happiness and then, like it's always happened in the past, you lose happiness. Something bad happens again and boosh, there it goes. And this time you will not be able to survive the loss of hope, right? That's just what I was saying a moment ago. And it's basically has this idea of, well, better to have no hope than to have hope and lose it again. So that's kind of its greatest fear. That's why it keeps doing what it's doing. It doesn't trust that you can actually be happy. So let's talk about the antidote for this part. Like what can help this part heal and maybe back off a little bit and let your beautiful, authentic self lead. right, so now we're on to the part where we talk about how do you heal this part, right? If it's been with you a long time, you probably can't even imagine, like, can I ever stop doing this to myself? You can, you can. So IFS teaches that the way to find happiness is to increase the amount of self energy that we have versus parts. So IFS teaches basically that every person is born with this beautiful, wise, authentic self. On the next couple of slides, I'll go into more detail about what self feels like, but essentially authentic self is you without the trauma. Like, who would you have been without the trauma? That's what we're getting at here, right? If you didn't have to have protectors constantly on guard trying to protect you from emotional pain and keep you safe, who would you be? You would be more your authentic self, these natural inborn qualities and temperament and traits, and just your humanness, who you are as a person. You would be kind of devoid of those very strong emotions and very black and white thoughts. Those are signs that parts are on boards. So self doesn't really have very strong negative emotions and very polarized black and white thinking styles. Self is very wise. It's very centered. It's very calm. It feels very open, very spacious. It's willing to approach even if something is scary. It has courage. So yeah, when you are in self, you're much better equipped to go throughout your life with a lot of wisdom and choose paths that are good for you. Parts, however, can get us into a lot of problems. Their intention is always good. So IFS always teaches parts' intention is good. It is trying to help. But what happens is a lot of these parts came on board when we were very young, right? We were powerless children. We were being abused, and parts came on board to help us stay safe. And what's interesting about trauma, parts are locked in at a certain age. So they're often age locked. Maybe they're us at 12 years old, or they're us at 5 years old, for example. So they don't have the capacity to lead our life with wisdom. They're very highly reactive, and they definitely shoot us in the foot. So we don't want parts guiding us through life. Ugh, no, we want authentic self. So that's the first one on here, as you see, of the antidote here, is to build a relationship between the self-sabotaging part and who you authentically really are. And when I'm working one-on-one with clients in session, oftentimes their parts have no connection to self, none. So trauma does that. It breaks the connection to authentic self. So you're attempting to rebuild the connection between parts and who that client authentically really is. Because the more the parts begin to trust self, they will let self lead. Otherwise, they won't. They'll take you right over and they will lead for you and shoot you in the foot. So you really want them to have a relationship that they can trust your authentic self and let yourself lead. You want to teach the parts that you are stronger than it realizes. Like, look how much you've survived already. A lot of these parts don't actually trust that we will be okay. And sometimes, again, you're trying to update them that was then, but this is now. Like, I'm a really capable adult now. Look at how much I survived. Look how much I've overcome. I am really capable of overcoming so much more than this part believes that I can. We want to build the part's ability to withstand distress in tolerable, small steps. So the purpose of this is not to overwhelm parts. We want to build their tolerance for emotional distress just a little bit at a time so that they realize, oh, I am safe. I can handle this. I'm not going to overwhelm. I actually can tolerate a lot more than I believed I could. That's right. That's right. Yes, you can. So we're really updating parts. Again, that was then. This is now. So trauma therapy is always about teaching the system that today is very different and they actually have safety now. They didn't when they were a kid. They were powerless, but they're not powerless anymore. So that's very important for trauma survivors to come out of fight or flight and relearn, probably for the first time, that safety can exist, that they can find that. That's huge for trauma therapy. We want to teach parts that it's okay to have hope and happiness and normalize that life has ups and downs. So a lot of these parts definitely hold beliefs like nothing wrong should ever happen again. But that's not realistic, right? So there's a lot of unrealistic beliefs that parts hold. So you definitely want to kind of work with them and update them that, hey, even though life has ups and downs, that doesn't mean that we're going to collapse and not being able to handle them. In fact, actually, when you look back, you've actually already successfully handled probably a lot of things that initially you didn't think you could. So again, you're a lot more capable than you really think you are. And life does have ups and downs like that. That's just normal. And normalizing that life does have periods of distress, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth living and that things can't be okay. And yeah, the last one here, we want to improve or show the part that happiness is not static, right? It just does. It's not like some magical place that we're like, oh, I know, I will magically find happiness and then it will just stay the same forever. Not realistic, not realistic. Yeah. So you have to teach these parts too, that some distress in life is completely normal, unavoidable, but that's okay. They can get through this. They can do this. So yeah, and essentially improving self-worth too is another big one. The more we love ourselves, the more we trust ourselves. And the more we trust and love ourselves, the more parts settle down and they stop acting out in the ways that they do. So that's another key component as well. Okay, the next slide here is really teaching you what self looks and feels like. And oftentimes, again, as trauma survivors, totally normal to not have a sense of self. This is something we're building when we're in therapy together. The 8 C's of self comes from, again, Dr. Richard Schwartz is the founder of IFS, and he's defined the 8 C's as being calm, having creativity, being courageous. So even though things are scary, we have courage to go through them. Clarity. So again, the absence of those very polarized thought processes, that black and white thinking. Compassion, empathy, curiosity. So we definitely come in there with this air of curiosity. No judgment. We leave judgment at the door. Judgment has never helped us feel better. Criticizing ourselves has never helped us feel better. But curiosity, like, what is this about? Let's find out more. What's going on here? We want to help this part. Feeling connected and feeling confident. So these are the 8 C's of self. By no means are these the only things that may describe self. Things like playfulness and humor, joy, definitely are self qualities as well. But hopefully that gives you an idea of some self energy, what it feels like in a nutshell. And one last note that I wanted to leave you with is that self is a fabulous leader. Parts cannot lead. They can take us over, shoot us in the foot, but they don't make great leaders. Again, they have those strong emotions. They have very polarized beliefs, very inaccurate beliefs, harmful beliefs. They can flood and emotionally shut down. They can activate the fight or flight system of the body. They're not leaders. They were developed really to protect those smallest, most wounded parts of us that we got from childhood and being abused. So they're not great leaders. So essentially, the more we activate and improve and grow self-energy and self-leadership, the more parts will settle down and they will let self lead. So an example I like to give here is like, think of a loving, nurturing, warm teacher, maybe your favorite teacher you ever had in school, right? So all the parts that we have, including the self-sabotaging ones, are like the children in the classroom, right? And without a teacher, you can imagine if you went in a classroom with no teacher, it would be an absolute crap show, right? You would have like little Jimmy over there throwing spitballs, maybe Margaret's pulling Maria's hair, and somebody's setting fire to something in the corner. Like it would be crazy. And that's like what parts are doing inside of us when there's no sense of self. There's no leader. There's no captain of the ship. And the ship is going to run aground and the classroom is going to burn down. That's why we need a good leader. And leadership is where it's at. That's what IFS is all about, building and improving self-leadership so that we can actually be happy. And even though life has ups and downs, we're able to weather the storm and come through it with wisdom and clarity and compassion and all of that. I like this image here of this guy leading the other guys up the mountain, like, again, self can be like, I know the way. It's okay. Self is encouraging. It's kind. It doesn't criticize. That's not a leader. It doesn't criticize. It's very encouraging, and it leads by example. And it's like, I believe you. I believe in you. You can do this. So if you haven't ever felt those qualities inside yourself, no surprise. No surprise. I tell all trauma survivors, this is to be expected. When we've been wounded and traumatized, we don't have a strong sense of self. Again, that self was broken. So we got to get in there and restore self-leadership to heal a lot of these wounded parts. So if you found this video helpful, please leave me a like. Feel free to subscribe. Would love any comments. That helps my channel grow. Lots of other IFS videos on my channel. Feel free to check them out. Lots of other parts that I've gone through as well on my channel. So I really hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care, everyone.